Prime Minister is visiting US on 21st through 23rd of June at the invitation of His Excellency President Biden and the First Lady Dr. Jill Biden. What I would do is give you a brief run overall structure of the program outline, try to sketch a bit of context, key elements which currently resonate in the relationship, and then go on to speak about very briefly about the program in Egypt. Firstly, this will be Prime Minister's first official state visit to the United States. PM has earlier visited US roughly 6 times, both in bilateral capacities as also for multilateral events. First, about the program. The first leg of his program in the US is in New York, which starts on the morning of the 21st with celebration of the International Day of Yoga at the UN headquarters in the morning of the 21st. You would recall that United Nations General Assembly had adopted a resolution proclaiming June 21st as the International Day of Yoga. While in New York, Honorable Prime Minister will also meet a cross-section of prominent personalities and leaders. From there, he departs for Washington on 21st itself, where his program for the Washington leg commences. On the first day of his arrival in Washington, D.C., on 21st, the first key engagement would be an event that is focused on skilling for future, which essentially would try to bring out the key complementarities and the objectives that both systems seek to promote and achieve in the field of skilling and capacity building. On the same day, on 21st, there will be a private engagement between President Biden and Prime Minister. On 22nd June, which is the second day of the program in Washington, that's the day of formal bilateral meetings, essentially would have 4 or 5 key components. The first component being the ceremonial welcome at the White House. The second component being a set of bilateral meetings between the two leaders as also the accompanying delegations. The third component is Honorable Prime Minister's scheduled address to the US Congress and the congressional reception thereafter. And the concluding component for June 22nd would be the ceremonial state dinner hosted by the Honorable President and the First Lady in honor of Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi. The day 3 of the Washington leg, which is June 23rd, Prime Minister's program again would have 4 or 5 key components. The first being his interaction, one-to-one interaction with select CEOs spread throughout the day. Thereafter, Prime Minister will also be hosted by the US Vice President and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken at the State Luncheon, which is part of the official state visit. Prime Minister will then interact with prominent professional personalities as also leaders from cross-section of the society at an event at the Kennedy Center. Prime Minister's last engagement in Washington, D.C. will be an interaction with the community leaders immediately after the Kennedy Center event, whereafter the Prime Minister will depart for Egypt. In terms of substantive context of the US visit, if I could just take a minute to highlight some of the key components on which we will continue to speak to you in coming days as the visit unfolds, and depending on Honorable Prime Minister's interaction day to day during his visit to the US. The first is a milestone in our relationship between the two countries. You heard Honorable External Affairs Minister say yesterday, it's a very significant visit, very important visit, a visit on which there is a genuine and widespread deep interest in the United States. Two, the visit is very rich in both form and in substance. Three key component would be the leadership connect during the visit between the two countries. Four, naturally, an important element of the visit will also be discussion on the bilateral relationships, the line of effort, the objectives that we set for ourselves in terms of looking at next series of transformative agenda items in years ahead. And in that, I guess the effort would also be to build a network in which these new domains of partnership could be properly positioned. I must mention here that Honorable Shri Narendra Modi ji would be among the rare few leaders, world leaders, to have been accorded the honor to address the US Congress more than once. Clearly, another key context which has always continued is a strong and widespread degree of bipartisan support in the US Congress to the strengthening of this relationship. In terms of key elements of the relationship, many of which would feature very prominently during this visit. One, of course, as I said, is the political connect at the leadership level. High level of and very intense level of political exchanges has been one of the key features of our relationship. Just within this month, we have had 3 very high-profile visits from US to India, including of most recently, which is the National Security Advisor of the US, Jake Sullivan. Prior to that, Defense Secretary of the US, Excellency Lloyd Austin. And we also had the privilege of hosting Secretary of State Blinken earlier this year. The second key component which has been a very strong pillar of our relationship has been strong trade and investment partnership. Whether you look at the quantum of bilateral trade touching close to $200 billion or the strong flow of capital on both sides. 3, the technology component. And technology component interfaces with many other domains. So technology itself interfaces in the telecom area, in the space area, in the manufacturing domain. Also, a lot of it also as a triangulation of technology, manufacturing, and investment. A lot of this translates into that. Within the technology realm, the critical and emerging technologies has been the most recent area of focus, an area which presents itself with really very exciting opportunities for bilateral engagement in months and years ahead. The next key component which will also be showcased prominently during the visit is the bilateral defense cooperation. It has been a critical pillar of our engagement, and within that a new element this year we expect during this visit we expect is the progress on defense industrial cooperation roadmap, which essentially takes us on the path of how the defense industries on both sides can partner closely, both in not just in the field of co-production, co-development, but also do it in a manner that the supply chains on both sides in this field, the industrial ecosystem broadly speaking in the field of defense, could talk to each other, could cooperate with each other far more intensely. Another key component, always a very vibrant, robust and dynamic component of our relationship, in many ways a strong driver of the relationship, is also the diaspora, Prime Minister's interface with diaspora. We have close to 5 million strong Indian diaspora in the US, which contributes enormously and very richly to the growth, the substance and the strength of the relationship. Another key element, part of it, I referred to in my early on in my remarks, is the whole domain of skilling and mobility. In some cases independent, in some cases linked in that regard. Those would be the broad outline contours of Honorable Prime Minister's visit to the US in terms of the program, the context in which the visit is taking place, key elements not just of the relationship but also which will feature prominently during the Prime Minister's visit. Moving on to the second leg of Honorable Prime Minister's visit, this would be to Egypt at the invitation of His Excellency Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the President of Arab Republic of Egypt. The state visit to Egypt will be on June 24-25. It is worth mentioning here that this will be Honorable Prime Minister's first visit to Egypt, and I might also mention that this would be the first official bilateral visit of the Indian Prime Minister to Egypt since 1997. There have been visits in between, but they have mostly been for the multilateral or plurilateral events. You would all recall that most recently the Egyptian President had paid a state visit to India when he graced our Republic Day earlier in the year as the chief guest. At this stage, Prime Minister is expected to reach Cairo in the afternoon of June 24th, where his first interaction will be with the India unit. This unit is a select unit of high-level ministers, which the Honorable President of Egypt had constituted after his return from India. I think it was in March sometime that it was constituted. So Prime Minister's first interaction will be with this unit. I must mention here that over the last several months, since the visit of the President of Egypt, we have seen intense level of ministerial level political exchanges between the two countries. External Affairs Minister himself, Honorable Raksha Mantri ji and Minister of Environment have travelled to Egypt. We have had similarly at least 3 to 4 ministers from the Egyptian government who have visited India. Even as we speak, a ministerial level delegation led by the chairperson of the Suez Canal Authority is in India. Clearly shows you the extent of very sharp focus that both India and Egypt are placing on strengthening all aspects of their relationship. After that interaction with the India unit, Prime Minister will have a interaction with the small Indian community that is there in Egypt, and will likely also meet some of the prominent personalities in Egypt. His next day will begin with a visit to Al-Hakim Mosque. It is the 11th century mosque which was refurbished, renovated by the Bohra community, and the visit to Al-Hakim Mosque will be followed by a visit to the Heliopolis War Grave Cemetery to pay tribute to the Indian soldiers who made the supreme sacrifice fighting for Egypt during the First World War. Prime Minister will have official engagement at the Presidency of Egypt, including bilateral talks with President of Egypt and signing of various MOUs and agreements on that day. Thereafter, Prime Minister would return to India. Just a brief few words on the key elements of substance. I just referred to the intense level of political exchanges. I must also add that most recently the Grand Mufti of Egypt was in India on a very successful visit. As you all know, Egypt has also been invited as a special guest during the India's G20 presidency. This is a very quick reciprocal visit coming just within 6 months of President Sisi's visit to India. We do expect and are confident that the visit of Honorable Prime Minister of Egypt will not just ensure continuing momentum to the relationship between our two countries, but will also help it expand to new areas of trade and economic engagement between our two countries.